Hello and welcome to FunBikes TV. My name is James and today we're going to be setting the valve clearances on the Trail Blazer GT80 Mud Rocks buggy. We're now going to set the valve clearances on our GT80 buggy. The first thing we need to do is remove the overhead valve cover. For this you will need a 10 spanner or socket and simply remove the 4 bolts on the overhead valve cover. Remove your spark plug cap and pull the HT lead down out of the way. I tend to tuck it down below one of the choke or throttle cables just to hold it out of the way when we're doing this, and then remove the valve cover. This will be tight when it's on there. There is nothing to do in this section here, it is literally just a cover on the engine. As you can see, we've now exposed the rocker arms, your valve springs and your valves. Now normally when you set the valves on the engine you need to find top dead centre. However, with these engines there is a trick you can do to save you finding top dead centre, as these engines actually have a false top dead centre. The piston comes up to top dead centre, drops down, then comes up again a fraction. So the easiest way to find the correct position for the valves is to slowly pull the pull cord over, making sure when you do this that the key is removed from the vehicle, and fully compress one of the springs. It doesn't matter whether you do the inlet spring first or the outlet spring, but fully compress one of the springs on the vehicle. If you go too far, just pull it down again. You'll feel the pull cord go slightly slack and easier to pull when it's not under strain as you're finding the correct position. Okay, so the outlet spring is fully compressed, which means I can set the inlet valve clearance. Over a period of time, your valves will bed in, so periodically you will need to check these on the vehicle. The inlet valve on one of these engines is 4/1000th of an inch. The outlet valve is 8/1000th of an inch. So on the feeler gauge that is 0.04. Find the correct feeler gauge in the set. Because these are quite thin, just run your fingers over it first. You can see this one's been used multiple times by little marks on it. Then carefully slide it between the rocker arm and the top of the valve. Now, the best way of describing this, it wants to feel tight, but not solid. You need to be able to move it through it. This, as you can see, is slightly loose on this engine. So what we need to do is you need to tighten this up. To do this, you'll need a 10 spanner or socket for the top nut and a 14 spanner for the bottom nut. Hold the bottom nut in position and loosen off the top nut. Carefully wind it back away from the bottom nut. Replace your feeler gauge and then start to wind in the bottom nut. So you just start to feel a little bit of friction there. It only takes the smallest adjustment to go from being too tight or too loose to the correct amount. So that's got a little bit of friction as it's coming out of there, so that's the correct amount. Leave the feeler gauge sat in there to start off with. Hold the spanner on the nut and then tighten the nut back up, making sure the bottom nut does not move when you tighten it. Once you're happy with that, check the feeler gauge. As you can see now, that's gone a fraction too tight. The nut moved very slightly when I was tightening it up. This is a little bit of a patience job. It generally takes 2 or 3 goes to get it in the correct position. Nearly there, just a fraction too tight that time. So it's going to back it off just a fraction again. And that is still a fraction too tight, because after I've removed the feeler gauge, I can't slide it back into the gap in between the two. I'm sliding the feeler gauge backwards and forwards now, and I can feel the resistance between the two. So that is now set correctly. Once you've set the first side, pull the pull cord over. Until you fully compress the inlet valve, and then you can set the outlet valve. The outlet valve needs to be 8/1000, so that's 0.08 on the feeler gauge. To back off the first nut, then wind the internal nut in slightly, placing it between the two. For the one way I was taught to feel for the correct feeling on a valves when you're setting the tappets is the old style metal biscuit tins with that bit of snugness as you pull the lid off the side of the metal tin. Okay, that feels about perfect on there, so we just need to tighten that up. Pop your gauge in between again. You can see again, fraction too tight. One little trick you can do is actually back off the interior nut about 1/8 of a turn, and then when you tighten it, it tends to be about the correct amount on there. And that's got the correct resistance to it. Once you're happy with them and the nuts are tightened up against each other, just simply replace the overhead valve cover. Make sure that you've got the cork gasket in place when you replace it. If you damaged it when you remove it, we do recommend replacing that cork gasket. Once you replace the cover, make sure your breather pipe from the overhead valve cover is connected to the carb cover, and then replace your HT lead on the vehicle. We've now set the valve clearance in our GT80 Trail Blazer buggy. Thank you for watching FunBikes TV. My name's been James.